Yo, what's up, DTA? So, by the way, I just won my soccer championship for the league, so you're looking at a champ right there. Second thing, today we are talking about the American Revolution, which everybody remembers tons and tons and stuff about. So a lot of this stuff is going to be old to you and stuff you already saw, but other things are new that are being introduced just this week because we're going more in depth into them because you guys are eighth graders now and you can do that because you're awesome. So we're going to go through this real quick and then there's going to be a big review with lots of questions at the end. So make sure you're paying attention, getting those notes down, getting it done. So first, you've got the 13 colonies. Just to remember what we were doing last week, you have those three regions. You've got New England, the middle colonies, and the southern region. Remember, all these people were British. They had come over from England, and they got their ideas for architecture, for government, for like languages, like names of towns, all that stuff, religion. They all came from the British. And so that's where all their ideas are coming from, and they kind of consider themselves British. One of the things that they did not have, though, is this vocabulary word right here, which is sovereignty. Sovereignty, say it out loud. Sovereignty. Yeah. So sovereignty is the power to govern a state. So even though they could make some of their own laws, they had kind of a representative democracy, like in the House of Burgesses, and then in the Plymouth colony with the Mayflower Compact, they kind of could do that. They were still under control by the British Parliament and by the King of Britain, King George III. So soon after the American colonies have grown bigger and bigger and all this, the British fight a war against the French. If you look, it's called the French and Indian War because the French and the Indians were on the same side fighting against the British. So you have this whole swath of land from the Mississippi over to where the American colonies are. The British and the French were fighting over that territory. And the British end up winning this war and beating the French. So this is what it looked like before. The French controlled all this territory. And then at the end of the war, after the war was over, the French were basically kicked out and the British ran all of this. So this would seem like a really good thing for the British, right? It would seem like they won, so they'd be richer, they'd be better off and all this stuff. But really what happened was they had lost a ton of money because they spent it all fighting this war. So when they lose so much money and they had no money, then they do what all countries do when they have no money, and they raise taxes. Their idea, though, right, because they still need to pay for schools, they still need to pay for roads, they still need to pay for the army, and so they're just going to raise taxes to raise more money. But their idea was to raise those taxes on somebody else who couldn't even vote on whether they had those taxes raised on them or not. And that's what's going to make the Americans so mad, that they really didn't have a choice. They had no vote, no say into whether these taxes were going to get raised. So some of the taxes they had to pay were the Stamp Act. They also had to pay they had a tax on sugar. That was because of the Sugar Act. They had a tax on tea because of the Tea Act. And all these things, all these taxes are being imposed on the Americans without the Americans being able to vote and have a say. That's what's making them mad, that they don't have that vote, they don't have that representation, they don't have a say in whether they're getting taxes. More taxes happened. The Townshend Acts were a really big set of them. That taxed everything that came into the U.S., such as paper, tea, all these things turned into a big deal. So Patrick Henry is this guy. He makes this really famous speech. He says, no taxation without representation. What that means is that they didn't want to be taxed unless they had a vote, unless they could elect their own representatives in the British Parliament who could decide for them and make laws for them. Then they didn't want the British to be doing something to them. So they wanted either a vote or no taxes. And to protest, what the colonists did was they would boycott these English goods. And when you boycott something, that means that you're not buying it. so that the person who's selling it goes broke. And so the colonists, they stopped buying English goods. They boycotted them. They made sure that no English people got any money from the colonies because they were mad about taxes. So then there were some other things that were happening too. And these kind of just kept the ball rolling and made it snowball and get bigger and bigger and bigger. The first was the Boston Massacre. And you can go to this bit.ly link, bit.ly/DTA Boston, to watch a video about the Boston Massacre. And then when you finish with that, go to bit.ly/DTA Boston Tea to watch a video about what happened at the Boston Tea Party. And these happened soon after the other one, so it's just building up this tension. The British response to these, what was happening, these protests, they responded to the boycotts, they responded to the Boston Tea Party by passing laws called the Intolerable Acts or the Coercive Acts, which were trying to force the Americans to do things that they wanted them to do. They were trying to force them to pay back for the tea that they'd thrown in the harbor. They were trying to force them to buy British goods. And instead of making the Americans agree with the British, that just made them more and more angry. So there are 4 vocabulary words on your paper. You probably know some of these, but some of these are probably new. The first is patriots, and patriots are Americans who wanted to fight for independence. And you can contrast patriots with loyalists, who were Americans who wanted to stay under British control. Loyalists are called loyalists because they were loyal to the British king. That's where the loyal comes from. They wanted to stay with the British. They were loyal. They were faithful. They were staying there with the British and not disobeying them. Now, these two on the right, these ones are relatively new. The first is Sons of Liberty. And Sons of Liberty were serious patriots. There were some famous people who were the Sons of Liberty, like Sam Adams and John Hancock, who were both the people who organized the Boston Tea Party and other protests. So they were like the really serious patriots. And then next were the Committees of Correspondence. And Committees of Correspondence were the patriot organizations in towns. So these committees of correspondence would get all the patriots together and they would organize things like militias. So they had like a small army in each town. They would organize the boycotts and the protests. They would work with the Sons of Liberty to make sure that all the colonies were connected together, unified, fighting against the British. So let's look at some things that people were saying, and that way we can analyze the way that people thought about the British. So this first quote right here is from Thomas Paine when he wrote his pamphlet Common Sense. And see if you can figure out what he's trying to get people to think. So he says, "For all men being originally equals, no one by birth could have the right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever, and though himself might deserve some decent degree of honors of his contemporaries, yet his descendants might be far too unworthy to inherit them." So let's break this down. So all men are originally equal. This is a big idea that the Americans were laying out. So if all men are equal, no one could have the right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to others. So no one has the right to set up his own family above others. So who do you think he's talking about who had set themselves up above everyone else? Right, it was the British king. And so these Americans, they believe that all men are equal. And so what is it that he's saying here about the way Americans should act with regards to the British? Exactly. He's trying to say Americans shouldn't listen to the British king because we believe that all men are equal. And so we should have our own government where we don't have to listen to the king. You've also got Patrick Henry, very famous guy, says, "Give me liberty or give me death." So he's saying either we get freedom, we get to make our own laws, or I'm going to die. So I'm willing to fight for my freedom. King George III, the King of England, had a totally different side of what he was thinking, though. So let's read this and let's see how he thought about the colonies. So he said, "The colonies provide much needed goods to their mother country, and as a result, I wish for them to stay within our empire. Britain needs the products that come from the colonies. I desire what is good. Therefore, everyone who does not agree with me is a traitor. Once vigorous measures appear to be the only means left of bringing the Americans to a due submission to the mother country, the colonies will submit." So let's break this down. What's he saying in the first part? The colonies provide much needed goods to their mother country, and as a result, I wish for them to stay within our empire. So he's saying the colonies provide goods to the mother country. So what system is he really talking about here? And what's he saying that that system of mercantilism does for the British Empire? Exactly, it makes them richer. So then he's saying the colonies make us richer, so I want them to stay. And then let's look at what he's saying afterwards. He says, "I desire what is good. Therefore, everyone who does not agree with me is a traitor." If everyone who doesn't agree with him is a traitor, what kind of person is this guy? Is he going to listen to people talking to him? No, he's not. He's saying, you have to listen to me. My word is law. Anything else you do is wrong. So this is clearly going to be a conflict because the Americans want something different than what he wants. So he says, once vigorous measures appear to be the only means left of bringing the Americans to a due submission, then the colonies will submit. So he wants war. That's the only thing that he's going to do. So loyalists also had a different tack. They were thinking King George III is our God-given king. It's our duty as his subjects to serve him. If we revolt against that fact, then we are revolting against God, and his subsequent bloodshed will only be the result of incurring his wrath. We should avoid war at all costs. What idea is this guy trying to get across? Exactly. They thought you had to listen to the king, and that was it. So very different to Patrick Henry's "give me liberty or give me death." So now try some review questions. See if you can recognize these terms. See which ones you know and which ones you don't know. Good luck.